everybody. Jeff Jones here. Welcome to the weekly Chase Oaks Church podcast. Before we dive in, I want to encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and download the Chase Oaks Church app. The app is the best place to catch up on messages, engage with our community, and stay in the loop with everything going on around here. Most importantly, my hope is that today's message inspires you to take your next step in your faith journey. Here we go. And I'm glad you're here and with us, whether you've been here a long time or this is your first time, whether you're online or one of our campuses. I want it all. I want it now. Could be the new national anthem. I'm not recommending it, but it would be fitting because we live in a culture that screams more, more, more. And life will be great once you get more, 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 right? And it can drive us. In our series, Simplify, what we're doing is saying, let's make sure that we're not, with all the distractions and all the demands and all the ways we're pulled, actually missing what's most important. But instead, let's build our lives around that which is most important. And today, we're talking about the secret of contentment in a culture that is not a very contentment-oriented culture. Again, that screams more, more, more. I mean, here's some forces of discontent, right? Like consumerism, of course, where you just need the next thing. And once you have the next thing, you'll be great, right? But just like any appetite, consumerism, it just like hunger, like, if you eat later today or tonight, it's not like that's the last time you're going to eat. You'll be satisfied for a little bit, but then you'll be hungry again. And consumerism is the same way. And yeah, you can get the next house, you can get the next car, you can get the next purse, you can get the next golf club, you can get the next whatever, but it's not like now I'm set. And that'll last about a minute till you're thinking about what's next, right? And consumerism can just drive. I'll be content when. Another force that keeps us discontent in a culture like this is comparison. Now, comparison has always been a thing in every culture throughout history. But now with social media, we've taken it to a whole new level, right? Because when we get on social media, we see people that we know putting their best life out there, and their life looks so much better than ours. I mean, their vacations are amazing compared to us. Their family looks just so perfect. Their dating life is so interesting. Their abs are so much more six-packier, all of that. And you're thinking, man, if only. And that can just keep us constant discontentment. And keep in mind, too, that I think it's up to like 40% of social media content now is ads and sponsored that's designed to fuel discontent and in comparison. So there's that, those two things, consumerism and comparison. And then there's this thing called January. And thank God January's over. Because in January, I just always feel like, self-improvement is a great idea. And yes, a lot of us, like me, I always think, I could be thinner, I could be fitter, I could be more organized, I could be a lot of things. And I think I'm all for self-improvement. I think self-improvement is a really great idea. However, you and I will never self-improve our way to contentment because there's always going to be something, always going to be something, always going to be something. We live in a very discontented culture. And what would it look like instead to find contentment, peace, and joy in whatever circumstance we're in? That would be pretty amazing, right? And today it's what we're going to talk about. And we're going to do it in two ways. Kind of a simple life hack that's significant but still shallow compared to the other, where we'll hear from Paul in the New Testament talk about the secret of contentment. But first, the life hack that all of us can use, whether you're a Christian or not, doesn't matter, and it is helpful. And I'll have you help me with this. It's just a little phrase, 4 words. It could be worse. Okay? It could be worse. In fact, let's say it. It could be worse. All right? Now, when I point to you, I'm going to have you say it here. So here, let's try that. It could be worse. And we can practice this, okay? So if you're, at home, you have to figure it out. But if you're here at church, at a church building, some of you have kids, and when you go to get your kids, you're going to see some family where the kids have like these perfect little matching outfits, and they're so look so great. And your kids, you're going to see them in their hand-me-down Target clothes, and you're going to think, oh man, I got to stop at North Park on the way home. But instead, you're going to say, could be worse, right? Because it could. And then when you go to the parking lot, you're going to pass cars on the way to your car that are way better than yours. And when you get to your 10-year-old Honda, you may feel a little discontent, but instead you're going to say, could be worse, right? And then when you're driving home, you're going to pass neighborhoods, you're going to pass houses that are nicer than yours. And that's fine, right? But when you get to your house, you may feel a little bit discontent, but instead tonight you're going to say, it could be worse. And now this is very specific for ladies who are married. When you look at your husband sometime later tonight, I don't know what you're going to be thinking, but if you're with him now, I just want you to look at him and say, it could be worse, right? Now that whole thing was just for that punchline, which I know is kind of lame. But you go to a church like this with a pastor with this sense of humor, but could be worse. It could be. But actually, that just a practice of gratitude. That's actually not a bad idea. Just to remember, whenever we feel that discontent, that it really could be worse. It is true. But today, where we really want to go is at a deeper place than that. And that is what Paul will call the secret of contentment. And in every believer that I know that I would say is like a maturing, godly person, one of the things that they have in common, as I thought about that, is this secret of contentment. And it's a powerful thing. Paul talks about it in Philippians 4. And we'll just look at one verse and then later dive into the bigger passage. He said, I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. Now, wouldn't that be great? Right? Because we can tend to think, well, I will be content when my circumstances change. When I get a better job, then I'll be content. When I get married, then I'll be content. When I get unmarried, I'll be content. When I get another house, I'll be content. When I get another this, when I'm not sick anymore, when I'm not, and sometimes I'm all for good circumstances, but contentment is not about circumstances. He's talking about the secret of contentment in any and every circumstance. So what does that mean? What does that look like? And so we're going to see it in the book of Philippians. Because in the book of Philippians, that's really the theme of it, is joy and contentment no matter what, in any circumstance, and what Paul calls in Philippians 4, the secret of contentment. And I'm going to give you just a little clue, because I'm not going to tell you yet, but a little clue as we start to look at some of these passages. And here's the clue. Contentment is not about settling, but about elevating our lives with a whole new focus. The desire for more we have in our soul is actually a good thing. So it's not about just denying that, just being apathetic, saying, oh, well, it's not that. It's actually about elevating our lives with a whole new focus and finding something more in whatever circumstance we're in. So here's the deal in Philippians. So Paul talks in Philippians 4 about the secret of contentment. We're going to go to that passage in a little bit later. But he doesn't tell us in Philippians 4 what the secret is. It's like, I know the secret, but he didn't say it. You're like, come on, you got to tell us. And he does, but he does it through the whole book. It's really what the whole book is about. So we're going to start in Philippians 1, and we're going to see it modeled, and then we'll talk about it in Philippians 4. Because when Paul wrote the book of Philippians, his life circumstances were terrible. He was a prisoner. For his faith, he didn't go do something stupid and, get in jail. He was in prison for his faith. He had been arrested in Jerusalem, and as a Roman citizen, which most people in that part of the world were not, but he was, as a Roman citizen, one of the rights you have is to say, I don't want to be tried here. I want to be tried by Caesar himself in Rome. And then they were obligated to get you to Rome, but that took a long time. In fact, for Paul, it was like 2.5 years of getting to Rome. He was in different jail cells, different prisons. He did this boat thing that crashed or that sunk, and he's on this island for a while. But eventually he gets to Rome. He's under house arrest because that was another thing. If you were a Roman citizen and you hadn't been sentenced yet, then you could be not in the dungeons, but under house arrest, chained to a Roman guard. And so that was his situation. This went on for a few years, which was a frustrating, not perfect thing. And yet you see the secret of contentment in a few ways in Philippians 1. So one is Paul, if it was a type A, driven, goal-oriented person. Some of you are like that. And I understand that disease. And he was very passionate about what he was doing, taking the good news of Jesus all around around the world. So that was his goal. But now he's stuck. For a few years, he's sidelined from that. And you would think it would be driving him crazy. Talk about discontent. I mean, that would certainly make me discontent. But listen to what he says about that in Philippians 1:13. Now, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel, the goal of helping other people know the good news of Jesus. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. He's saying, okay, I can't go around and start churches in different parts of the Roman Empire, but you know what? It's pretty stinking cool. Because Paul was chained to a Roman guard 24/7. They would go on 8-hour shifts, chained to him. And he's like, I've got a private audience. A captive audience. They can't go anywhere. And so what do we talk about? We're going to talk about Jesus. And these weren't just any guards. They were the palace guards who in the Caesar's palace, not in Vegas, but in Rome, right? It's Caesar's palace. And so these guards are hearing about Jesus and they're talking about it. And Paul says, not just them, but all over the palace, everybody's talking about this Jesus. And Paul's like, how else would that have ever happened? Right in the heart of the Roman Empire, in Caesar's palace. And not only that, other Christians in Rome hearing about that are now more bold, despite persecution against Christians, to share with others about Jesus, and people are coming to know Christ. So, yeah, okay, I don't have the mobility I would love, but it's okay. It's going to give us a big clue about the secret of contentment. But then he had another problem, and the Philippians were concerned about that, and that is, well, he would at some point, he would stand before Caesar. In a time of persecution against Christians, Paul is the most prominent Christian. And so if Vegas was betting, the odds might be that he would be killed for his faith. Now, in this first imprisonment, he was, and you can tell by its big hint that it's the first, that he was not killed. He was released eventually. But in his second imprisonment, he was not released. When he appears then before Nero, he's beheaded. So now he doesn't know in this first imprisonment what's going to happen, but certainly possible, and eventually that did happen, that he would be killed. And so he was concerned about that. And here's what Paul says about it. I will continue to rejoice despite my circumstances, for I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. I eagerly and expect and hope that I will no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or death. For to me, to live is Christ. I get to be with Jesus. And to die is gain. If I'm to go on living in the body, this will mean more fruitful labor for me. I get to live out God's purposes in this world longer. Yet what shall I choose? I don't know. I'm torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. Some of you have people who are in heaven, and you wonder about them. It is better by far. But it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain, and I will continue with all of you for your progress in joining the faith, so that through my being with you again, your boasting in Christ Jesus will abound on account of me. He says, I really think I'm going to get out this time, but it doesn't matter. Either way, I'm good. Whether I die or I live, I'm good. It's a secret of contentment. And then he goes on more. So another thing that's going on that would be a very difficult circumstance, it'd be very frustrating, is that now that Paul is confined and he's in prison all the way in Rome, other Christian leaders who have a different perspective about Christianity than Paul does have taken advantage of his being sidelined. And they're tearing him down to make themselves more prominent because they had a different twist of Christianity, which was a legalistic bent. Paul was all about Well, the gospel of grace, the good news of Jesus, that we all come to God by not by us being good enough, but by his grace and his mercy. And therefore, it's not about, you got to be good enough and then you be accepted, all that. But these people were much more legalistic, much more, but we got to tell them, and all that. And so it was a different version of Christianity. And so that struggle goes on all the time in Christianity. Grace is hard to understand. And so legalism is pretty easy to think, that's the way it should be. That sounds right. So we have that tension today too. And they had it then. But now these legalistic people are gaining prominence because Paul is sidelined and he can't do anything about it. And by the way, that whole thing of Christians tearing down other Christian leaders went on 2,000 years ago. It's flourishing today because of media. And let me just say this as a warning. Anytime you see a Christian leader trying to build themselves up and gaining followers and gaining attention by tearing some other Christian leader down, that should be a big red flag. Don't be sucked into that. I mean, I have friends around the country who are very well-known Christian leaders, and I see the slander that's being thrown around about them, and I'm like, that is so stupid. Do people really believe it? And they do. And it's terrible. One of the things that God hates, the Bible says, one of the main things God hates in Proverbs is slander, because it is so destructive. And I've had it aimed at me too, and it's no fun. I hear it sometimes about Chase Oaks, and that's no fun either. Chase Oaks does this, or, that's just why. And I'm like, what? Like, you really think we do that? And you really think that if we did, that would be a reason that we'd be happy? Like, really? But it's just so easy for that to happen. It's clickbait. You just, you get all worked up. And just don't get sucked into that stuff. But that was going on then. But listen to how Paul talks about it. Philippians 1:15. It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, building themselves up, not sincerely, supposing they can stir up trouble for me while I am in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of this, I rejoice. What he's saying is, you know what? They may be a little twisted in their Christianity, and they may be saying terrible things about me and causing me stress and causing me problems, but in the end, they're still leading people to Jesus. So let them go. May not be my favorite thing that this is happening to me, but it doesn't matter because at least Christ is preaching. People are coming to know Jesus, and so I'm good. And once again, we see the secret of contentment illustrated. Think, well, what is it though? Okay, that's an illustration. You see it, all these things. What is it? Well, let's take that question to Philippians 4. The passage where he just took one verse out, and we'll do the whole paragraph here. And in this case, Paul's going to be talking about financial provision, either having not enough or too much. How can you be content no matter what, and what financial circumstance? Because one of the reasons Paul wrote the book of Philippians was to thank the church at Philippi for sending him a large financial gift. Now, they had been supporting his ministry and for whatever reason, stopped doing that for a while, which meant Paul had not enough. And now they've sent this support, so now he has enough. Now, that was a big deal in his situation under house arrest, because as a Roman citizen, you could be under house arrest and chained to a guard, not in the dungeons if you could afford it, because you had to pay for it. But if you couldn't, you'd be put in the dungeons. So it was a big deal. And so what we're going to see is Paul's going to say, you know what, whether I'm in the dungeons or here, I'm good. But let's look at it. Philippians 4:10. I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern, financial concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned before, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. He's saying, hey, look, thank you for the gift. But the truth is, whether you gave or not, whether I'm in the house arrest or in the dungeons, whether I don't have enough to eat or I've got more than enough to eat, in the end, doesn't really matter. Because I've learned the secret of contentment. I've learned that I can be content in any circumstance. And then he adds the verse, one of the most well-known verses in the Bible, Philippians 4:13. In this translation, NIV, I can do all this through him who gives me strength. I bet you've seen that one place or another. Usually it's in this translation, this Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I saw it on the back of a truck yesterday. It was a box company. And on the back of this big truck, it said, Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So it's like, okay, we're going to sell boxes. He's going to give me strength to sell boxes and pack stuff up and whatever, okay? Which is fine, but it's like, okay, here we go. And, or athletes love this verse. Like, you may remember Tim Tebow when he was at Florida. He had, he would put in black one of the verses. He did John 3:16, but more often he did Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Tua, quarterback at Miami that used to be at Roll Tide, thank you. Yeah, Philippians 4:13. He's a strong believer. Philippians 4, and I love those guys. They're great. I can do all things through. So these quarterbacks, they can, pass the ball. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Steph Curry, how great is he? On the bottom of his shoes, he has, I can do all things from this verse, Philippians 4:13. Evander Holyfield, when he went into the ring for the first time with Mike Tyson, he had a robe made, and on the back was Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. If I was going to the ring with Mike Tyson, I would put every Bible verse I knew and, whatever on it. I get that. And it worked. He beat him. But then he wore that same robe when he faced Sonny Liston, and Philippians 4:13 did not work out so well in that fight. He got beat. So Philippians 4:13 sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work. Is that the thing? And it's one of the most misunderstood, misapplied verses in the Bible because we can apply it to everything. Whatever we want to do, I can do all things through Christ. Like he's obligated to make me successful. I can do all things through Christ. And that's not what it is. Like I remember a friend in high school who didn't study for a test. And he was like, it's okay because I can do all things through Christ. It's like, no, you're going to fail. That's not what that verse means. The verse has a context. And the context is great news if you want to be content in any circumstance, because that's what it's talking about. He's saying, through Christ, I can find him, and he will give me strength to be able to handle anything and be okay. I can do all things. I can endure all things. I can get through all things, not on my own, but through Christ who strengthens me. I can live a contented life. I can live out the secret of contentment because of the provision of Christ, because of Jesus in my life. And if you have Jesus in your life, that's a huge advantage. If you don't, and you're on your own, you can try, but it's one of the wonderful things about God being in our life. I can do all things through Christ. He empowers us to obey, including being content. I can do all things through Christ. We can live the secret of contentment. But still, what is the secret of contentment? Yes, his enablement is huge, but what is the secret of contentment that drove Paul that we see illustrated? As I said earlier, contentment is not about settling. It's not about just acting like, oh, I'm okay even when I'm not okay. But about elevating our lives with a whole new focus. The secret of contentment isn't about denying our want for more. That's actually God-given. We're made for more. It's realizing that the only thing that will satisfy the desire for more ultimately is Jesus. That ultimately, what satisfies our soul is our Creator. It's finding his presence and his purpose in any circumstance we go in, because it's always there. And that's what Paul was doing. In all those circumstances, that's what he did. That was his pattern. If he's stuck in prison, well, he's looking, where's Jesus in this? And where's his purpose in this? Oh man, I get to share Jesus in the whole Roman palace to these guards that are chained to me. Okay, he found purpose. Facing a potential death sentence, well, again, he's finding purpose in it. Okay, whether I live or die, if I die, okay, I'm in heaven. What's wrong with that? But if I live, well, I get to serve Jesus longer. Enduring slander, okay, that's not fun, but look at what how God is using these people anyway. Even with bad motives, people are coming to know Jesus. Suffering financial need, well, I get to know God's strength. I get to see God provide in a way that I never would see God provide. It's finding God's presence and his purpose in whatever we go through. And when that is your focus, that's the elevated focus, then it really doesn't matter what circumstances you're in. In fact, the worst circumstances are where you find God the deepest. And often where you sense God's purpose is the deepest and most significant. A couple ways that people in my life have said this over the years. One, and you'll hear me talk about this from time to time. One is a former professor of mine whose phrase for living this way was living the great adventure. And he would say it all the time. Anytime something good or frustrating happened or difficult, and he had some really difficult things happen in his life, and it wasn't flippant. It's okay to grieve, be sad, change your circumstances. All that's fine. But no matter what, he would just say, well, it's part of the great adventure. So something, frustrating would happen. Like one time they made a huge mistake at a bank. He had to spend like 2 days at a physical bank doing this. The manager was so apologetic, and he's like, well, it's okay, just part of the great adventure. The guy was like, what are you talking about? He said, I follow Jesus. I never know where he goes. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's really cruddy like this. It's really frustrating. But it's okay. I'm just figuring God's in this somehow. So let's find it. You want to help me find it? Bank manager's like, well, okay, whatever. Right? But it's just a different mentality. I mean, you can see how you'd be sort of unshakable, unflappable with that. Or my mentor that I've mentioned over the years when I was in junior high, started there, but high school and college, Miss Helen, who was just this older, godly woman. It was amazing relationship with God. And I remember when I went to her when I was at my darkest, in a time of deep depression. And I've shared this before, how she looked at me and said, Jeff, God is honoring you with this. Most people he allows to stay shallow, but he loves you too much for that. He's given you the opportunity to go deep. And I hope you get through the depression. I hope you get undepressed, and do everything you want to do that. Get doctors, do whatever, that's fine. But don't miss what God's doing here. Because if you can find God in the middle of this darkness, if you can find his hand, and it's there, if you find it, you will never let it go, and he will never let you go. You will walk with him differently the whole rest of your life, and that's true. I didn't like that time period, but I wouldn't change it for anything because of that. It's looking for God, looking for Jesus, looking for his purposes, looking for his presence, no matter what we're going through. And then it doesn't matter what we're going through, good or bad, tough or difficult, not enough or too much, whatever. We're looking for God in the middle of it and looking for his purposes. And I bet you know people like this, especially if you've been around Christians. I bet, there's some Christian that you know that has walked with God, related to God for a long time, and they've been through highs and lows like everybody on this planet. But no matter what, they're joyful, contented people. It's not that they don't grieve, they do. Jesus grieved. It's not that they don't struggle. It's not that they don't get frustrated. But above that, there's just this sense of, you know what? I'm going to be okay because I'm going to find God in this, and I'm not on my own, and I can do all things through Jesus because he's with me. And that's available to all of us. I mean, people who've walked with God a long time, Paul said, I've learned the secret of being content. This isn't something that happens like that. As we go through things over time and we see God show up like Paul, it's like, okay, I've learned this. And it's a good thing to know, and it's a good thing to learn. So I want us to pray in whatever circumstance we're going through that God will meet us there. And I know some of you, I do not want to make light of your circumstance because some of you are in terrible circumstances. And I really do hope those change. I really do. But in the meantime, I hope you'll also find God in a new way and find his purpose in a new way. Let's bow our heads together. Father, I do pray for people who right now are not in plenty, they're in want. Who are not in an easy time, but in a really difficult, confusing, confounding time. And I pray that you would meet them in that. like Miss Helen said, that they would be able to find your hand in the middle of it. And I pray that no matter what, you would help us in this world where we're never content to find contentment, not in our circumstances, not in our stuff, but in you, no matter what we're going through. And Father, I pray for those who may not have a relationship with Jesus yet. Yeah, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That is there. Your presence is available. And I pray that right now you just help people who want to take that step. Say, God, I want to know you. I want a relationship with you. You've done everything to make that possible. You just ask that I say yes to what you offer as a gift. Not only forgiveness from sin, but your enduring, transforming, empowering presence in my life. God, I need you. I say yes to that. And help me walk with you. Father, thank you that we are not on our own in this broken and fallen world. And one day you'll fix it. In the meantime, thank you that you can always be found when we seek you. In Jesus' name, amen.